They thought he was running away. They laughed when they saw the Sherman tank turning its back. German officers raised their binoculars and smirked, convinced that fear had finally broken another American tanker. In their minds, this was not bravery. This was surrender. But what they didn't know was that this was not a retreat. It was a trap so calculated, so ruthless, that by the time they understood it, nearly 300 German soldiers would be dead, and the battlefield would become a graveyard of disbelief. This is the story of a tanker who broke every rule of armored warfare and rewrote what one man inside a burning steel coffin could do. The man inside the Sherman. His name rarely appears in textbooks. No statues were built for him, and for decades, his story was buried beneath official reports and forgotten after-action summaries. He was not a general, not a war hero raised on propaganda posters. He was an ordinary tanker, grease-stained hands, exhausted eyes, and a mind sharpened by survival. He had learned early in the war that courage alone didn't keep you alive. Think indeed. By 1944, the Western Front had become a killing field for tank crews. German Panther and Tiger tanks ripped through Shermans with brutal efficiency. Every American tanker knew the truth. If you were hit, you were probably dead. And yet, he stayed. The day everything went wrong, it started as a routine advance through contested territory. The Sherman rolled forward with infantry support, engines humming, tracks chewing mud and broken stone. Then the radio crackled. German units had been spotted. Not few. An entire reinforced formation. Machine guns opened fire. Mortar shells fell like rain. Anti-tank weapons hid in shadows, waiting. The Sherman took its first hit. Not enough to kill it. Enough to warn them. The crew froze for half a second, the longest half-second of their lives. Most tank commanders would have pushed forward or pulled back immediately. Instead, he did something that made no sense. He turned the tank around. The moment the Germans misread. From the German lines, it looked obvious. The Sherman was fleeing. German soldiers stood up from cover. Officers waved men forward. Machine gunners repositioned casually, no longer worried. Why would they? The enemy tank was leaving. They didn't see the tanker's eyes inside the turret. They didn't hear his calm voice giving quiet instructions. They didn't know he had already memorized the terrain. The slope, the broken farmhouse, the narrow forest corridor. This was not escape. This was bait. The Sherman stops. The tank vanished briefly behind a ridge. Then it stopped. The engine idled. Inside the Sherman, sweat poured down faces blackened with smoke and oil. Ammunition was counted. Angles were calculated. The tanker knew something the Germans didn't. They were about to advance, aggressively, carelessly, and all at once. And when they did, they would walk directly into hell. The ambush begins. The first German unit CRE crested the ridge. Then the second. Then the third. They were packed together infantry, machine gun teams, officers shouting orders. That's when the Sherman turned back around. The turret swung. The main gun fired. The explosion ripped through the front ranks, tearing bodies apart and throwing men into the air like broken dolls. Before the smoke cleared, the machine gun opened up. The Sherman wasn't retreating anymore. It was hunting Panikspreads. German formations collapsed into chaos. Men dove for cover that didn't exist. Orders overlapped and contradicted. Screams replaced commands. The Sherman fired again. And again. Each shell landed where it would do the most damage. Command clusters. Ammunition carriers. Machine gun nests. This was not random fire. This was execution by calculation. Why, he left the Sherman visible. Most tankers used cover. He didn't. He kept the Sherman partially exposed, just enough to be seen. Why? Because fear makes men predictable. German soldiers focused everything on the tank. They ignored the terrain. They ignored the angles. They ignored how narrow the approach had become. And every second they focused on the Sherman was another second they moved exactly where he wanted them. The count rises. 10 minutes in, dozens were dead. 30 minutes in, over 100. German reinforcements arrived, but instead of coordinating, they rushed forward blindly, desperate to destroy the tank that was humiliating them. The Sherman kept firing. The barrel glowed. The interior filled with smoke. Shell casings piled at their feet. Still, he didn't stop. The moment they realized the truth, a German officer finally understood. This wasn't a coward. This wasn't a mistake. This tanker had chosen this position. By the time orders to withdraw were given, it was too late. Retreating troops were cut down by machine gun fire. Wounded men were left screaming. The ground became slick with blood and torn uniforms. The Sherman had turned a battlefield into a funnel of death. The Sherman takes hits. German anti-tank fire finally connected. The tank shook violently. Metal screamed. One crewman was wounded. Another hit would end them all. The tanker made the call. Fire, everything left. Hide! The final shells tore through the densest clusters of soldiers. Then silence. Aftermath. When Allied forces arrived later, they didn't believe the reports. Bodies were everywhere. Equipment abandoned. Weapons dropped mid-run. German records would later confirm the impossible number. Nearly 300 soldiers killed or incapacitated. But Juan Sherman, that was supposed to be running away. Why, this story was forgotten. It didn't fit doctrine. It didn't fit manuals. It didn't fit how wars were supposed to be fought. It proved something uncomfortable. That one man, inside a fragile tank, could outthink an entire force and turn fear into a weapon. So the story faded. Until now, war is not always won by the strongest armor, or the biggest gun, or the loudest command. Somechi. War is not always won by the strongest armor, or the biggest gun, or the loudest command. Sometimes it is won by a man who understands human fear better than his enemy, and is brave enough to let them believe he is weak. The Germans laughed when the Sherman turned away. They stopped laughing when the ground stopped breathing. And long after the smoke cleared, the silence remembered his name, even when history forgot it.